Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. A human rights tribunal hearing for day school survivors continues in Burns Lake, British Columbia. Survivors and witnesses testified about alleged abuses they suffered at Immaculata Day School. APTN's Lee Wilson has more.
The Canadian Human Rights Tribunal hearing is taking place in Burns Lake in northern BC for 2 weeks. The tribunal is looking at allegations that the Prince George RCMP mishandled the 2012 investigation into alleged historic abuses from 6 survivors at the Catholic-run Immaculata Day School. Leaders from Lake Babine Nation and Chilkasco Nation, or Burns Lake Band, arrived for the opening ceremony earlier this week. It's the first tribunal hearing held outside of Ottawa. Lake Babine Nation Chief Murphy Abraham shared he was a student in Immaculata and thanked those in attendance for listening to the difficult testimony.
Trying times here today, to sit and discuss and to interview some of the witnesses that have gone through the day school system.
3 of the 6 day school survivors who made the 2013 complaint against the RCMP have passed away. Dorothy Williams, one of the original survivors, testified this week. She could not hold back tears as leaders spoke of survivors finally being heard. The survivors allege the police did not take their case seriously because they were Indigenous. It is an allegation that the RCMP has denied. Due to a 2022 publication ban granted by the tribunal in federal court, an alleged abuser can only be referred to as AB. The Immaculata Day School was closed in 1986. Since the late 1800s, more than 200,000 children were forced into church-run day schools across Canada, which aimed to assimilate Indigenous children into colonial society. The in-person part of the tribunal in Burns Lake will wrap up next week, and then it will go virtual, as it is expected to take 10 weeks. Lee Wilson, APTN National News, Burns Lake.
APTN's online reporter Kathleen Martins is on the ground in Burns Lake and joins us now. Kathleen, good to see you. Journalist Laura Robinson took the stand yesterday and today. Can you tell us a bit about what she had to say?
Well, yesterday Laura laid out how many trips she's made here to northern BC from her home in Ontario to meet with survivors of the Immaculata Elementary Catholic Day School. And how the genesis of the story, how it came together, how she learned about the survivors up here, and then how she was able to gather their story. Anyone who's covered stories, speaking to people from remote First Nations knows they don't always have phones, vehicles, computers, Wi-Fi. That was very much the case here for Laura 10 years ago. It was 2012 when she first received a tip that brought her up here. And in the time she did subsequent visits, at one point a note was slipped under her hotel room door. She'd received unsolicited emails. Someone would stop her in the street and say, "Oh, you need to go to the Red Apple Clearance Center and talk to this woman," or, my cousin. These are close-knit communities who a lot of them went to school together. They know what happened there. But when you're coming in as an outsider, you don't know them or how to necessarily get a hold of them. So she laid that out for the Human Rights Tribunal.
And now, of course, RCMP lawyers cross-examined her. How did that go?
Yeah, that's happening today as we speak. Really interesting. They've asked, have she been able to verify these claims? He says, well, abuse, it's not always public. Some of it happened in front of the other students, physical abuse, but the 2 survivors who've been on the witness stand so far have said they were taken to a boiler room, the furnace room, where there was a lot of noise, and it would drown out their screams when they were hit with straps or rulers or a pointer stick. So, she wasn't able to say that she could independently verify survivors' claims of abuse. the Mounties lawyer also asked, well, when you first went up to Burns Lake Band Office, over 30 people were waiting there to meet with you. Could they collude on their stories? Could they compare their stories? And she had a really great reply that I want to share with you. She said they could mingle and talk for the last 50 years. So, in her defense, she's like, these are not stories that were created for my benefit. These are their experiences at day school, and they shared them with me. Sure, a lot of them were similar because they had similar teachers and similar experiences.
The end of week 1 is nearing here. There's another week still. What's coming up next week?
Next week will be more witnesses for the survivors' case. They have alleged that the RCMP did somewhat of a half-hearted job investigating their complaints that a teacher was racist and physically abused them when they were in day school 50 years ago. One of the interesting witnesses, or one of the more interesting witnesses, sounds like a police officer who investigated the Graham James sexual abuse case, a junior hockey coach involving some hockey players, and how he looked into that and figured out what happened enough that charges could be laid. So that'll be interesting.
Kathleen, we'll have to leave it there, but again, thanks for the work you're doing up there. Glad you're there, and we'll talk to you soon.
Okay, thanks, Dennis.
Coronation of King Charles is this weekend. After the break, we'll hear from our panel on if it actually means anything. Stick around. Welcome back. Elizabeth II, great-great-granddaughter of Queen Victoria, died last fall. Son Charles automatically became king. His coronation as Charles III is May 6th. Our Truth in Politics panel is here to talk about that. Carrie Benjo is in Regina, Negon Sinclair in Winnipeg. Carrie, Negon, great to see you, great to have you with us, talking about the big coronation here. Of course, the treaties were made with the British Crown, mainly Queen Victoria, in the 19th century. So are people still taking the monarchy serious today and holding them in the same esteem? Carrie, do you think that this relationship should endure in the way that it did in the past?
Well, speaking with those that are heavily educated in treaties, they maintain that their treaties are with the Crown, and they existed prior to Canada, and so they really stand true to that relationship, that their treaties are with the Crown and not with Canada. And so I think a lot of it is they still have that sense of relationship with the monarchy, even though we're so far removed from them. There is still that treaty relationship that exists.
Negon, obviously we know the Governor General is the vice-regal representative of the monarchy. Does it matter that she's Enoch?
Normally I would say that, the Governor General position is kind of irrelevant. But I would say that in this case, what you do have is you have the ear of the king, or the forthcoming king, will be not just an Inuk woman, but a very strong one who's very versed, marched with many of our peoples in our communities, was involved in much of the activism that's led to the United Nations Declaration, all the things that we're seeing today. And so what I would say is that typically no, but in this case, perhaps yes. If you think back to the papal visit last summer, the Pope was traveling across the country, and the first moments upon arriving in Quebec City, was basically chastised by the Governor General in front of a national media audience. I mean, that's the kind of bravery that I think Mary Simon brings to the position, and I think that she'll be an absolute, force to be reckoned with. The problem is, of course, will the monarch listen? King Charles has shown some interest in the past looking at Indigenous issues. He famously said to an audience in Rwanda, we have to talk about colonialism. That's totally different than his mother. And then, of course, he has in the past showed interest on really specific issues like climate change, for example, when it comes to involving Indigenous peoples in the equation. The question is whether he'll respond to what over a dozen Indigenous leaders across the world and Commonwealth countries have said. They wrote a collective letter to say, return the artifacts, return the wealth, and most importantly, rescind the doctrine of discovery.
Carrie, Prince King Charles stopped short of an apology for the Crown's part in the residential school legacy. What are the chances that that could be coming, do you think?
I think, following what Nigan said, King Charles is different from his mother. He is from a different generation. And I think he is more in tune with the pressures of society. There's a lot of social media. I think he's more in tune with what is being said and what is being, what the public is saying. And there is a movement. We've seen the Catholic Church issue an apology, come to Canada. I think there is a possibility that he may entertain the idea of issuing an apology. I think that would go a long way. But I'm still holding my breath. He's still controlled by the monarchy. Although he's king, he still has to listen to whoever's giving him advice.
Nigan, other than an apology, how could Charles signal a new era of reconciliation with Indigenous peoples?
Well, I'm scared to hear that Carrie's going to hold her breath, because I think if we see an apology, we know that the monarchy moves very slowly. We know that the monarchy, if anything, what Carrie pointed out is true. They're losing public support. This would go a long way to gain public support. But, you've got a country like Australia that is absolutely ready to go, and they're ready to dump the monarchy and move towards some kind of other constitutional position. What can the king do right away? The king could return artifacts. If we just look at Australia alone, there's tens of thousands of artifacts that have been stolen from Australia, and they can be returned almost immediately. We know that there are hundreds and perhaps thousands, if we think outside of the British Museum, that are stolen from our communities right across Turtle Island. And so that could be something that could be done very quickly, not just an apology, but also the return of artifacts and human remains. Human remains is something that the British Museum has had for a long time and hasn't shown on display. So there's not even an economic argument to be made for keeping many of those things that are from our communities. And so those are some of the things that can happen right away. I think when we get to ideas of how do we share wealth, how do we return stolen land, those things seem to be a little bit more harder to sort of imagine, because those would be states that would do things like that, not so much the monarchy. Never mind that the monarchy is not the rich entity that it used to be. I think that what we're going to see in the coming days is we're going to see a lot of photo opportunities. Most of the chiefs of Canada are over there in England right now. And I think that the challenge is tomorrow will be the day to honor murder missing Indigenous women and girls across the country. And many of the leaders of First Nations will be over there overseas, Métis and Inuit as well. And I think that is pretty stark. I think that's a challenge that we really aren't taking care as much as things on this side of the ocean as we are perhaps paying attention to those across the ocean. So, it's yet another day, another struggle, but I think most importantly, we'll see what the king does in the forthcoming days.
Carrie, Nigan, a good place to leave that. Appreciate you both being with us again this week.
Yeah, English. Thanks.
Thanks.
The Canadian Football League held its draft recently. Coming up on Sports with Stranger, we'll hear from a player from a First Nation in Northern Ontario who was recently drafted. Stay with us. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. Ahead of Red Dress Day tomorrow, Cheryl McDonald sent in their creation titled She Leaves. Cheryl says it's in honor of her stolen sister, Carlene, and the families who share the sorrow, anger, and strength. Thanks for sharing, Cheryl. You can email your pictures to share@aptn.ca to be featured as our next photo of the day. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the East Coast, 10 in Halifax, 15 for Fredericton. 15 in Kuujjuaq, cloudy, and 5 for Nain. 15 in Montreal, 17 for Val-d'Or. 13 with showers in Sault Ste. Marie, rain, and 14 in North Bay. 10 with showers in Thunder Bay, rain, and 12 in Sioux Lookout. 12 for God's Lake, 14 and sunny in Norway House. 19 for Winnipeg, 17 in Dauphin and Brandon. 18 for Regina and Saskatoon. 19 for Meadow Lake, 22 and sunny in Buffalo Narrows. A warm one in northern Alberta, 31 under the sun in High Level, 29 for Peace River. Sunny and 24 in Edmonton, 27 for Lethbridge. Showers and 17 in Vancouver, rain and 21 for Kamloops. 25 with showers in Prince George, 15 and rain in Smithers. 6 in Old Crow, 9 for Whitehorse. 21 in Yellowknife, cloudy, and 9 for Norman Wells. 0 in Sax Harbor, plus 6 in Paulatuck. 3 in Arbiette, 0 in Whale Cove and Chesterfield. Minus 4 with snow in Resolute, minus 3 in Joe Haven. CFL football season is nearly upon us, and the recent CFL draft has added a new crop of players this week. Our Daryl Stranger speaks with one Indigenous player drafted that is hoping to have an impact both on and off the field.
Thanks, Dennis. Today I'm joined by former St. Mary's University linebacker and now BC Lion player Marcus Jean Loescher. Marcus is from the Kitchener-Mixub and Ninewug First Nation in Ontario. Marcus, thanks so much for joining us here. I imagine the last few days and weeks have been quite a whirlwind, so we do appreciate it. And first off, congratulations on being drafted by the BC Lions this week. When I say that, what's that mean to you, Marcus?
It means everything. Just having my dad play for the team. I was around the BC Lions a lot as a little kid. Saw them win their Grey Cup in '06, which is a really good experience. So hope I can bring some of those same vibes back to the team.
Well, like you just mentioned, your father also played in the CFL, being drafted by the Lions, so I imagine it's kind of a full circle moment there for you and your family. How big of a role did he play in your life, and what are some of the things he taught you growing up?
He played a pretty big role in my life. He taught me a lot about football, definitely showed me the ropes when it came to playing defense. He played defensive end, so he was able to pass along some pass rush moves along to me. Just defensive knowledge in general, how to play hard, things like that.
And a few months ago, Marcus, I talked with CFL official Brian Krupolo, who also happens to be Indigenous. How important is it that there is Indigenous representation within the league? I mean, it's been around for over 100 years. How important is it that there are Indigenous people playing and you know, being a ref in the league?
I think it's definitely important for Indigenous representation. There hasn't been a whole lot that's been known, but I think that's going to change here soon. Even at these last two combines alone, there's plenty of Indigenous players that I met. And it's definitely important. It's important for little kids to look up to professional players that are doing it real life action and not have anyone to look to is hard. So
well,
important.
On that note, Marcus, how important is your culture to you? And second to that, do you believe you can be that role model for Indigenous youth, to be somebody that they look up to and not shy away from about showing their culture and who they are?
Yeah, it's definitely important to me. My family has tried to pick up on it as much as we can throughout the years. My grandpa passed away, but before he passed, he would always teach me and my cousins the language, different traditions. And then, sorry, what was the second question?
And then just the second part of that is do you think you can be that role model for other Indigenous youth that might be looking for somebody to look up to?
Yeah, I definitely think I could be that role model eventually. if not now, going into the CFL.
And just last one for you here, Marcus. And then as a player, like what kind of a player are the BC Lions getting with yourself?
With myself, I believe I'm very relentless. I'm always giving my all on the field. I love to be around the ball, playing on defense especially. That's what we're asked to do. To play hard and play with a good IQ.
Well, Marcus, thanks so much for this, and best of luck this season and going forward. We do appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome stuff. Okay, over to Ottawa now, where Annette Francis is standing by with a look at tonight's Nation to Nation.
Stay tuned for Nation to Nation after the news. I'll give you the highlights of the events happening on the Hill this week. The NDP put the hammer down, seeking immediate action for missing or murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people. It led to a motion passed unanimously in the House and a late-night 4-hour debate. We'll also hear what the Native Women's Association of Canada has planned for Red Dress Day. And our own Danielle Paradis will preview the upcoming Alberta election. Stick around for that after the news.
Thanks, Annette. It said Northern Canada is on the front lines of the climate change crisis, with communities there feeling the devastating impacts firsthand. Tomorrow night on APTN Investigates, Christopher Reed travels to the Yukon to weigh out the pros and cons of nuclear power.
Whether nuclear is coming to the north or not, solar's already here. And the Arena Group took a ride to look at how Old Crow has reduced their diesel consumption by 24%.
My name's Paul Josie, from Old Crow. Grew up here most of my life. So it brings a lot of hope for me, knowing that we have this alternative energy that we are using, and our elders and our community members seen this years ago when they realized that flying in diesel to burn is not sustainable for our community. The sun is providing the power that we need to run our little community.
But for Josie, small modular reactors aren't quite in the same category as solar and wind power generation.
My feeling to that is I don't trust it. I don't like that idea of something that we have no idea about how contained it can actually be. And they were talking about it for remote mines or things like that, and I don't have a very good feeling about those kind of units at this time.
You can catch the rest of APTN Investigates Nuclear North tomorrow night right here following the APTN National News. That is all the time we have for your APTN National News for this Thursday. For news anytime, you can head on over to our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Dennis Ward. Thanks for being with us. Stick around. Nation to Nation is next. May the 4th be with you and the Leafs tonight. See you back here tomorrow.